Okay, picture this. Every truly solid structure, right? Every impressive building, it all starts with a deep, unwavering foundation, something you absolutely have to get right because, well, everything else rests on it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's pretty much where we are now in our exploration of self-management.
Especially looking at it through Dr. Reviere's book.
Absolutely. Welcome back, everyone, to The Outsider Edge. This is season 2, and we're doing that chapter-by-chapter walkthrough of Dr. Reviere's vision of self-management.
And we've landed on chapter 4.
We have. And this one, it's critical. It really gets under the hood, uncovering the core, the natural principles that underpin the entire system he describes.
Yeah, this feels like the bedrock. It's not just about optional ideas or things that might be culturally specific.
No, not at all. Dr. Ravier argues these principles are fundamental truths. They're derived directly from human nature itself.
So if you miss these or misunderstand them, the rest probably won't quite make sense. Or maybe more importantly, it just won't work in practice.
That's the core argument, yeah. So our mission today is to really get a grip on these foundational elements. We'll look at the two fundamental axioms Dr. Ravier identifies first.
Okay.
And then unpack the 5 natural principles that sort of logically flow from them.
We want to understand why he calls them non-optional, right?
Yeah.
Why they're essential to our nature and how they form this undeniable basis for effective self-management.
Exactly. It's really about understanding the deep why behind all the mechanics and practices we might talk about later on.
All right, let's dig into that foundation then.
Yeah.
You mentioned axioms. How does Dr. Ravier define axiom here? What is that starting point?
So in the framework he's presenting, an axiom isn't just, an assumption or something you hope is true.
Right.
It's defined as a truth so fundamental that you actually cannot argue against it without immediately contradicting yourself.
Okay, so it's self-evident in a way.
Pretty much. It's a point of certainty you accept as given. And from these axioms, you can then use logical deduction to arrive at other certainties. He calls those theorems.
Like building blocks of logic.
Yeah. Think of it as the undeniable ground floor. From there, you can build this whole structure of logical conclusions.
Okay, got it. The absolute self-evident starting points. And the book identifies 2 major ones for self-management.
That's right. Dr. Ravier flags the axiom of consciousness and the axiom of intentional action.
Okay.
He proposes that these 2 fundamental truths about how humans exist and operate are really where we have to begin. They're the source for extracting the most important guiding principles, these natural principles, for any system involving people working together. Self-management included, obviously.
Okay, let's tackle the first one then. The axiom and principle of natural consciousness. What exactly does that axiom assert?
Well, the axiom of consciousness, it simply states that consciousness exists.
Which sounds, obvious.
It does sound obvious, right? But it's foundational because everything we've already touched on in earlier parts of this, outsider edge journey.
Things like tacit knowledge, self-learning.
Exactly. Reflection, self-discovery, all of that absolutely depends on the existence of consciousness. It's the prerequisite.
And that powerful, undeniable nature you mentioned. How does trying to deny it prove it exists? That logic again.
Yeah, it's a really neat piece of logic in the book. To even form the thought or say the words, consciousness does not exist, you inherently need to be conscious to do it.
Ah, right. The act itself requires consciousness.
Precisely. It's what philosophers call a performative contradiction. You can't argue against it without actually using the very thing you're trying to disprove. It defeats itself.
Okay, that is quite compelling. It demonstrates its own truth just by trying to negate it. So the axiom is, consciousness is real, and it includes our ability to perceive and understand reality, both, outside us and inside us.
Spot on. And flowing directly from this undeniable axiom comes the first natural principle, the principle of natural consciousness.
Okay, so how does that translate? From the basic fact of consciousness to a principle for how, say, a self-managed system should work?
Well, this principle dictates that any method, any process, any tool or practice used within a self-managed system must be designed specifically to help, or at least favor, the tacit integration of knowledge.
By the individuals within that system?
Yes, by the individual.
So it's not enough for the system just to be there. It has to actively support and maybe enhance our natural human ability to learn and absorb knowledge in that deep, intuitive way, that tacit understanding.
Exactly. And this is really where the why this matters to you comes in. As the book really emphasizes, tacit knowledge isn't just some interesting psychological quirk.
Sure.
It's the fundamental human instrument for becoming more effective, more efficient, more productive, and crucially happier in what we do.
Right.
So the principle of natural consciousness means that true self-management systems, according to this view, are built explicitly to tap into and amplify this core human capacity for, internal, personal knowledge growth and using that knowledge.
That directly connects the system's design to individual growth and well-being. Makes sense. If your system actually blocks learning, it's kind of working against our nature.
You got it.
Okay, so that's consciousness. Now for the second big axiom. The axiom of intentional action.
The axiom of intentional action, yeah, equally fundamental. It's simply the assertion that human beings act intentionally.
We have purpose behind what we do. We don't just react blindly.
Exactly. And the source uses that same kind of logic, the self-contradiction logic, to show why this is an axiom too.
Okay, let me guess. Trying to argue that humans don't act intentionally would itself require an intention.
To make that denial.
And then the action of expressing it.
You've absolutely nailed it. It's the same pattern. Any attempt to prove humans don't act intentionally requires, first, the intention to make that argument, and then the action of formulating and expressing it.
So the attempt itself confirms the axiom. You can't escape it.
You can't. So intentional action is also presented as a fundamental, undeniable truth about human nature.
Okay, so if we accept that we inherently act with purpose, what does that tell us about how we actually operate in the world, according to the book?
Well, it tells us that humans move with a clear aim. What the book calls a finality, basically, a purpose.
Right.
And that purpose is usually directed towards solving problems. These problems can be really broad, things like scarcity, dissatisfaction, ignorance, uncertainty.
All sorts of gaps or needs.
Yes. We pursue objectives because we have an expectation, a belief, that reaching that objective will bring us to a state of, greater satisfaction or benefit compared to where we are now.
We're always acting towards something we think is better.
Pretty much. We're driven by that expectation of improvement or resolution, guided by our intention.
Makes sense.
And from this undeniable reality, this intentional action, Dr. Ravier derives several incredibly important principles for self-management. He starts with two fundamental personal principles, ones that apply to the individual.
Okay.
Natural freedom and its necessary counterpart, natural responsibility.
And that word natural again, emphasizing these aren't just nice ideas or cultural choices we make.
Exactly. The source really stresses this. They are presented not as subjective options or things we can choose to adopt or ignore. They're described as essential, inherent aspects of human nature.
Things that have to be recognized.
Yes, and accounted for in any system involving people. Trying to build a work system that doesn't acknowledge natural freedom or natural responsibility. Well, the book argues that will inevitably lead to inefficiencies, internal conflict, maybe incoherence.
Because you're fighting against the grain of the people in it.
You're working against their very nature. So yeah, their inclusion is critical.
Okay, let's dive into those two personal principles then, the ones flowing from intentional action. First up, the principle of natural freedom.
Right. The principle of natural freedom is basically the core human capacity we have to choose our courses of action.
So choice.
Choice. Now, the book kind of acknowledges the big philosophical debates around free will, but it mainly focuses on the practical psychological experience of freedom within a system.
And how does that feel to us, that psychological experience?
Well, the feeling of freedom, this subjective sense of being free, it arises from recognizing or maybe actively creating or discovering that you actually have multiple different options.
Alternatives.
Yeah, alternatives, different paths available to you as you're trying to reach an objective. It's about seeing possibilities.
So freedom isn't just like the absence of chains, it's the presence of choices.
Exactly. And here's where it connects back beautifully to the first axiom and principle we talked about.
Consciousness.
Yes. This capacity to identify those options, to see multiple paths, is intrinsically linked back to the principle of natural consciousness, specifically to our ability for learning, creativity, and that capacity for tacit knowledge integration.
Ah, okay. How so?
Well, the more tacit knowledge you develop, the deeper your understanding gets, the greater the range of possibilities you'll actually perceive in any given situation.
Right, you see more angles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And consequently, you'll have more potential courses of action available as you move towards your goals.
Wow, that's a powerful link. So conscious learning literally feeds our perception of freedom, by expanding our options.
That's the idea presented.
So in a self-managed team, fostering that inner knowledge, that tacit understanding, it isn't just a nice to have for personal growth. It's actually foundational to people feeling free and capable within the system itself.
Precisely. If the system doesn't create the conditions for that tacit knowledge to grow, for people to learn and connect ideas intuitively, well, it's inherently limiting the very freedom it needs its members to exercise if they're going to act intentionally and effectively.
Okay, natural freedom, deeply tied to consciousness and tacit knowledge. Got it. That leads us right to its counterpart, natural responsibility.
It does. The principle of natural responsibility arises immediately alongside freedom because, well, choosing implies consequences, right?
Yeah.
And accountability.
Makes sense.
And here, the book draws on definitions like Fred Kaufman's, framing responsibility very helpfully as responsibility.
Responsibility, I like that. It reframes it away from just blame or guilt.
Absolutely. That's the key idea. It's not that you are responsible or guilty for everything that happens to you, the external circumstances you find yourself in.
Right, stuff happens.
Stuff happens. But you are undeniably responsible for how you choose to react, how you respond, and what steps you decide to take next in the face of those circumstances.
It's about owning your reaction and your subsequent actions, whatever the initial trigger was.
Yes. And for a self-managed organization designed around these natural principles, the principle of natural responsibility means the system has to actively create the necessary space and time and context.
For people to actually be able to respond effectively.
Exactly. For collaborators to be able to formulate and enact their responses. The organization doesn't just, demand responsibility out of thin air.
No.
It empowers it by providing the environment where people have the capacity and the support to respond skillfully and intentionally.
Okay. So far, we've got consciousness, freedom, and responsibility. And these are presented as fundamental principles rooted in the individual's nature, their capacity for intentional action.
Correct. They describe the sort of necessary inner state and capabilities of the individuals in the system.
Right.
But as the book points out, a company, an organization, it isn't just one person acting alone.
No, it's usually groups of people.
It's multiple individuals who need to somehow coordinate and cooperate towards a shared purpose. And this is where the next principle comes in. It's described as the backbone of known self-managed systems.
The backbone. Okay. Like carrying the weight of that collective action.
Exactly. This is the principle of natural commitment.
Okay.
This principle basically establishes the fundamental relationship between everyone involved in the company. It says they are all collaborators, colleagues, partners, contributors.
Regardless of job title or level.
Regardless of their specific role, function, or formal position. That's the starting perspective.
Okay, so the starting point is seeing everyone as a contributing partner in this shared thing. What does commitment mean in that partnership context?
Commitment within this framework isn't just like a static duty or obligation you're given.
Right.
It becomes a conscious, self-directed contribution that's aimed squarely at achieving the organizational purpose.
Okay.
And importantly, this contribution must be intended to generate value, both inside the company for the other collaborators and outside it for customers, society, whatever is relevant.
And the book highlights a couple of crucial characteristics of this kind of commitment.
It does. Two crucial things. True commitment must be self-initiated by the individual.
So you choose to make it.
Yes. And it must be agreed upon with the other involved parties.
Self-initiated and mutually agreed. That sounds, pretty different from traditional models where commitments are often just assigned, pushed down from above.
It fundamentally shifts the whole dynamic. Dr. Ravier even suggests that self-management, maybe the most accurate way to understand it, is as a model of management by commitments.
Management by commitments.
Yes. Explicit, self-initiated, agreed-upon commitments are basically the operating system.
Okay.
And given how central they are, these commitments must have two non-negotiable qualities. They have to be explicit, meaning clearly articulated, transparent to everyone relevant.
No hidden agendas.
Right. And they must be aligned with the overarching purpose of the organization. If a commitment doesn't actually serve the purpose, or if it's kept hidden or unclear, it breaks this principle.
Okay. Clear and aligned commitments as the engine. Now, the book mentions two significant theorems derived from this principle of natural commitment. Let's touch on those, especially the second one, which sounds like a really key point.
Okay. The first theorem that's derived is called the win-win ex ante theorem.
Ex ante meaning beforehand.
Exactly. The idea is that whenever parties enter into an exchange or an agreement, could be a formal contract, could just be agreeing to collaborate on a task they participate because they believe before the action happens, ex ante, that they will gain something.
They expect to benefit.
Yes, they expect to benefit from the exchange. This intrinsic expectation of mutual gain is seen as fundamental to understanding how people form and sustain these collaborative relationships, these commitments, within an organization.
So people aren't just doing things because they're told. They're engaging because they anticipate some kind of positive outcome for themselves from that interaction or agreement. Even if that gain isn't always, say, money or immediately obvious, it's about the expectation going in.
Precisely.
Okay. What about that second theorem you mentioned, the one about hierarchy?
Yes, this is a particularly significant point made in the book, and it's called the Theorem of Natural Hierarchies.
Natural hierarchies.
Yes. And here, Dr. Ravier directly challenges a very common narrative you often hear associated with self-management.
Oh, cheers.
The idea that self-managed organizations are non-hierarchical, or that self-management is somehow an alternative to hierarchy itself.
Right, like getting rid of bosses, flat structures.
Exactly. He states quite clearly that this is, in his view, a myth.
A myth?
Wow. That feels really counterintuitive to a lot of the popular discussion around self-management.
It does, doesn't it? And that's why it's such an important distinction he's making. He asserts that there is no organization on the planet, no matter how it's structured or managed, that is truly non-hierarchical.
Really?
None. That's his argument.
Hierarchy, he argues, is an intrinsic aspect of how individuals and systems organize. It emerges based on competence, influence, context, reputation, countless factors.
So it just happens naturally.
In some form, yes.
Right.
And self-management, in Dr. Revier's view, isn't something that eliminates this fundamental reality. It's a mode of management, a system of organizing, but it works within the reality of these natural hierarchies.
Okay, so the goal isn't necessarily to flatten everything, just for the sake of being flat, but maybe to apply these natural principles, consciousness, freedom, responsibility, within the existing, maybe more fluid natural hierarchies that emerge anyway.
Exactly. And this is presented as one of the strengths of Dr. Revier's approach, its flexibility. Because by providing core principles, practices, and attitudes that acknowledge this reality of natural hierarchy, the model can potentially be implemented in any organization, regardless of its specific structure, size, industry, culture.
Because it's working with the grain, not against it.
Precisely. It's working with the inherent nature of organizations and the people within them, rather than trying to deny or somehow eliminate what he sees as a natural phenomenon.
That reframes the whole challenge significantly. It's maybe less about pretending hierarchy doesn't exist and more about transforming how it actually functions, making sure it aligns with consciousness, freedom, and responsibility.
That seems to be the implication, yes.
Okay. We've covered consciousness, freedom, responsibility, and commitment, along with its derived theorems, including natural hierarchies. What's the fifth and final core principle?
The final principle is the principle of natural coherence.
Coherence.
Yes. This one is described as an important axiological principle, basically, value-based. Its role is essentially to provide cohesion and validation for all the other principles. Ah, okay. Like an integrity check for the whole system, making sure everything hangs together.
That's a really good way to think of it, yes. The core idea is that every decision made and every action taken within a self-managed organization must be coherent with the other principles, meaning consistent with them, logically supported by them.
Exactly. Consistent with and logically supported by the implications derived from the other four: consciousness, freedom, responsibility, and commitment. It acts as this kind of overarching standard.
Could you maybe give a brief example just to make it concrete? Like, if a team makes a decision that seems okay on the surface, but maybe it undermines individual learning or restricts options, how does coherence flag that?
Sure, absolutely. Let's imagine a team decides, maybe for the sake of perceived efficiency, to create a bottleneck. Like only one person is allowed to access or process some critical information.
Okay. Seems efficient, maybe.
The intention might be good, faster processing, perhaps. But if we check it against, say, the principle of natural consciousness, which requires facilitating individual tacit knowledge integration by exposing people to information and situations,
then that decision is actually incoherent.
Exactly. It works against that fundamental principle because it limits other people's ability to learn, to perceive options, to build their own tacit understanding. So even if it seems efficient in that narrow moment, it violates the principle of coherence because it's out of alignment with the system's foundational principles about human learning and consciousness.
Got it. That makes it much clearer. So coherence ensures that practices and decisions aren't just isolated acts, but they're actually aligned with the deep underlying values and truths about human nature that the whole system is supposed to be built on.
Precisely. It's kind of the glue that holds it all together and ensures the principles don't end up contradicting each other in practice.
Okay, so to bring it all together then, Dr. Ravier's framework for self-management, right at its foundation, rests on these 5 core natural principles: consciousness, freedom, responsibility, commitment, and coherence.
That's the essential set.
Yeah.
And the book emphasizes repeatedly that their relationship isn't like optional. They're complementary, they're interdependent, they're indivisible.
You can't just pick and choose.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't truly implement self-management, according to this view, by picking, say, freedom but ignoring responsibility, or focusing on commitment but undermining consciousness. They work together.
Because they're derived from those fundamental axioms about human nature and how organizations actually work.
Exactly. They form the non-negotiable foundation upon which all the specific self-management practices and attitudes are then built.
And it's powerful to see how these aren't just, theoretical ideas floating around. The book does point out that these principles seem to be demonstrably at play in actual successful self-managed companies that have been documented.
Yes, absolutely. The chapter briefly refers to various studies and books that have analyzed numerous real-world examples. Dr. Ravier points to authors and researchers like Frederick Laloux, Ricardo Semler, Brian Robertson.
People who study these kinds of companies?
Right. And studies on companies like Bertsorg, the Morningstar Company, Semco, and others that have experimented with specific models like holacracy are mentioned as well.
So while this chapter doesn't deep dive into those specific company stories, they're mentioned in the text as sort of real-world proof points, showing these principles in action somewhere.
Exactly. They are presented as evidence suggesting that when organizations manage to align their management practices with these fundamental natural principles, they can achieve some pretty remarkable results.
Okay. Well, this exploration for the outsider edge into Chapter 4 of Dr. Ravier's Self-Management has really laid bare that absolute foundation, these 5 natural principles: consciousness, freedom, responsibility, commitment, and coherence. And they're presented not just as suggestions, but as inherent, non-optional aspects of human nature and the reality of collaboration that any effective system really has to acknowledge.
It really frames it as building a system that harmonizes with our nature rather than trying to impose some kind of artificial structure against it.
Yeah. And that leads us perfectly to the provocative thought we want to leave you, the listener, with today, drawn from this exploration. Consider Dr. Ravier's assertion about natural hierarchy being a reality, derived from that principle of commitment. If hierarchy in some form is indeed a natural aspect of any system where humans collaborate, how does acknowledging that fundamentally change how you might think about building, or maybe just participating in, truly effective self-managed teams or organizations?
It's a big question.
It is. Is the true goal really about trying to eliminate all hierarchy? Or is it maybe more about transforming the nature of that hierarchy, shaping it so it consistently aligns with these foundational principles we've discussed: consciousness, freedom, responsibility, and coherence?
Something definitely worth pondering as you observe the systems you're part of.
Absolutely. Please join us for the next installment of The Outsider Edge, where we'll continue our journey through Dr. Ravier's book. Next time, we'll be delving into the practical side, the master practices and primary attitudes that actually flow from these fundamental principles we've unpacked today.
We look forward to having you with us then.